My name's Camilla, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes, the family you choose is more important than the one you're born into. Growing up, our house was always filled with the sound of my younger sister's laughter. Sarah was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Me? I was just there. I'd watch as Sarah pranced around the living room, putting on another impromptu fashion show for our doting parents. "I'm gonna be a famous model one day," she'd declare, striking a pose. Dad would clap enthusiastically. "That's my girl. You'll be on magazine covers before we know it." I'd roll my eyes and retreat to my room, burying my nose in a book about finance or economics. Even at a young age, I knew I wanted more out of life than just being pretty. As we grew older, the divide between Sarah and me only widened. She was all about partying and boys, while I focused on my studies. When it came time for college, I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would see the value in my hard work. "We'll pay for your first 2 years," Dad told me one night over dinner. "After that, you're on your own." I couldn't believe my ears. But what about Sarah? "Are you going to make her pay for her own education too?" Mom shot me a stern look. "Your sister has different talents. We need to support her dreams." I packed my bags and moved to another city for college. During the day, I threw myself into my studies, determined to become a financial analyst. At night, I worked whatever jobs I could find, waitressing, tutoring, you name it. Every penny I earned went into my savings for tuition. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I'd cry myself to sleep, exhausted and wondering if it was all worth it. But I refused to give up. I knew that education was my ticket to a better life, away from the constant comparisons and disappointments of my childhood home. By my 3rd year, I'd saved enough to cover my tuition. And for my final year? I hit the jackpot, a full scholarship based on my academic performance. Take that, Mom and Dad. Meanwhile, Sarah was living it up back home. She'd drop out of community college after a semester, claiming it was cramping her style. Last I heard, she was bouncing between modeling gigs and part-time jobs, still living in our parents' house. After graduation, I made the decision to stay in the city where I'd attended college. It felt more like home than my childhood house ever had. With my degree in finance and glowing recommendations from my professors, I landed a job at a prestigious firm. It wasn't entry-level either. They recognized my potential and gave me a position with real responsibility. I threw myself into work with the same determination I'd shown in college. Long nights, early mornings, whatever it took to prove myself. And prove myself I did. "Camilla, that deal you closed last week was impressive," my boss said one day, calling me into his office. "Keep this up, and you'll be looking at a promotion before you know it." I beamed with pride. This was what I'd worked so hard for, recognition based on my own merits, not comparisons to anyone else. It was around this time that I met Jake. We were both reaching for the same finance magazine at a local coffee shop, and our hands touched. Cliché, I know, but sometimes life really does play out like a rom-com. "Sorry," he said, flashing a warm smile. "You take it. I insist." "How about we share it over coffee?" I suggested, surprising myself with my boldness. That coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into weekend getaways, and before I knew it, 5 years had flown by. Jake was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner, kind, ambitious, and supportive of my career. Meanwhile, my career flourished. Each successful deal brought bonuses and new opportunities. By the time I hit 32, I'd saved enough for a down payment on an apartment and bought myself a reliable car. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, earned through my own sweat and tears. One night, over a homemade dinner in my apartment, Jake got down on one knee. As he slipped the ring on my finger, I couldn't help but think how different my life was now compared to my childhood. Here was someone who loved me for who I was, not who he wanted me to be. We decided to save up for a big wedding. After all, we'd both worked hard to get where we were, why not celebrate in style? I want it to be perfect, I told Jake one evening as we scrolled through wedding websites. A day that shows how far we've come. Jake squeezed my hand. Whatever you want, love. You deserve it. I threw myself into wedding planning with the same enthusiasm I'd shown in my career. I subscribed to bridal magazines, joined online forums, and created mood boards. Every spare moment was spent dreaming up our perfect day. Meanwhile, life back in my hometown hadn't changed much. Sarah was still living with our parents, now with a baby in tow. The father, some guy she'd dated for a few months, had disappeared as soon as he'd heard the news. "Your sister needs our help," Mom said during one of our rare phone calls. "It's not easy being a single mother." I bit my tongue, holding back the retort that Sarah had made her own choices. Instead, I simply said, "I'm sure she'll figure it out." "That's the problem with you, Camilla," Mom sighed. "You've always been so cold towards your family." The accusation stung, but I refused to let it get to me. I'd spent too many years trying to win their approval. Now, I was focused on building my own life, my own family with Jake. One ordinary Tuesday, as I was reviewing some financial reports at work, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender's name made my heart skip a beat, Sarah. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, I opened it. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a scanned copy of our parents' will. As I skimmed through the legal jargon, one fact became crystal clear: Sarah was the sole heir to everything our parents owned. My hands shaking, I dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the third ring. "Mom, what's this will Sarah sent me?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why am I not included?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her tone was defensive. "Camilla, you're doing well for yourself. You have a good job, an apartment, a car. You don't need our money." "That's not the point," I argued, my voice rising. "I'm your daughter too. Don't I deserve?" "Your sister is struggling," Mom cut me off. "She's a single mother, she has no job. We can't leave her with nothing." The conversation went on like this for a while, with me trying to understand their decision and Mom defending it. In the end, I hung up feeling hurt, angry, and completely dismissed. Over the next few weeks, I distanced myself from my family. I stopped calling, stopped responding to messages. It hurt, but I told myself it was for the best. I had my own life now, my own family with Jake. I didn't need their approval anymore. But just as I was starting to feel at peace with my decision, life threw another curveball my way. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Jake and I were lounging on the couch, flipping through wedding venues online, when my phone rang. It was my mother again. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" "Camilla," my mother's voice was strained, almost panicked. "I need surgery. Urgently. The insurance won't cover it all, and we need money." I closed my eyes, bracing myself for what was coming next. "How much?" $22,000, she said quietly. The amount hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a large chunk of what Jake and I had saved for our wedding. I glanced at Jake, who was watching me with concern. I need to think about this," I told her. "I'll call you back." After I hung up, I filled Jake in on the situation. He listened thoughtfully, then said, "It's your decision, babe. But if it were my parents, I'd want to help." I nodded, torn between my lingering resentment and the desire to do the right thing. Finally, I called my mother back. "I can help," I said. "But I want to do this properly. I'll open a bank account and transfer the money there. You can pay me back gradually." To my surprise, my mother balked at the idea. No, we need cash." "Can you bring it in person?" Something about her insistence on cash set off alarm bells in my head. "Mom, I can't take time off work right now. But I can pay the hospital directly if you give me the details." "No," she said quickly. "I mean, I don't understand all these modern banking things. Please, Camilla. Cash would be easiest." I was confused and a little suspicious, but I pushed those feelings aside. This was my mother's health we were talking about. Okay, I said finally. I can't come myself, but Jake can bring the money. Is that all right? She agreed, and we made the arrangements. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. But I pushed those thoughts aside. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Jake left early the next morning, a briefcase containing $22,000 in cash securely tucked under his arm. I kissed him goodbye, a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. I asked him to be careful and to call me as soon as he was done. He nodded, giving me a reassuring smile, promising he had everything under control. Hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake, informing me of his arrival. I held my breath, waiting for his call. When it finally came, Jake's voice was filled with a mix of emotions as he recounted the events of his visit. Upon arriving at my parents' house, Jake found that neither of my parents was home. Instead, he was greeted by my sister, Sarah. Jake explained the purpose of his visit, stating that he had brought money intended for my mother. Sarah informed him that our mother had been admitted to the hospital and our father had gone to visit her. She explained that they were borrowing this money to pay for our mother's operation. Despite the unexpected turn of events, Jake handed over the money to Sarah. After completing this task, he quickly excused himself and left. When Jake returned home, I was eager to hear about his trip. As he walked through the door, I rushed to greet him. Thank you for doing this, Jake. I'm sure it will help my mom a lot. There's something else, Jake added, looking a bit uncertain. Sarah wasn't alone in the house. There was a guy there, looked like he was living there. I blinked in surprise. A guy? Living there? Mom never mentioned Sarah had a boyfriend, let alone one who moved in. Jake shrugged. Yeah, he seemed pretty comfortable. I was surprised too. I sat back, processing this new information. It was strange that my mother hadn't mentioned Sarah's boyfriend, but I brushed it off as just another example of our poor communication. Well, I'm just glad we could help with Mom's operation, I said finally. I hope she recovers quickly. As we sat there on the couch, I felt a mix of emotions. I was worried about my mother's health, but also grateful that we had been able to help. The presence of Sarah's boyfriend at my parents' house was unexpected, but I decided not to dwell on it. After all, my family's well-being was what mattered most right now. Every day, I'd call to check on my mother's progress, my heart racing each time until I heard her voice. The operation went well, dear, she'd say, her tone reassuring. We're so grateful for your help. I'm feeling better already. Relief washed over me with each call, but a nagging feeling persisted in the back of my mind. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. A month passed, and I decided it was time to see for myself how my mother was doing. I took some time off work and made the journey back to my childhood home. When I arrived, I was surprised to find my mother already up and about, looking normal. There were no visible signs of her recent surgery, no hints of the illness that had allegedly threatened her life just weeks ago. Mom, I started, hesitantly. How are you feeling after the operation? She waved her hand dismissively, avoiding my gaze. Oh, much better. No need to worry about all that now. Would you like some tea? I wanted to press further, but seeing her bustling around the kitchen, I decided not to upset her. Maybe she just didn't want to relive the ordeal. My father was there too, doting on my young niece. Sarah, however, was conspicuously absent. Where's Sarah? I asked, watching my niece play with her toys. My mother's face lit up. Oh, Sarah's doing so well. She's got a job now, can you believe it? Works 7 days a week, even spends some nights there. Such a hard worker, our Sarah. I couldn't hide my shock. This didn't sound like the sister I knew at all. Wow, that's quite a change. People can surprise you, my mother said, a strange smile playing on her lips. I spent 2 days with my parents, playing with my niece, and trying to reconnect with my family. But something felt off. There was an undercurrent of tension, whispered conversations that would stop when I entered the room. Finally, it was time for me to head back home. As I drove, my mind wandered, trying to make sense of the strange visit. On a whim, I pulled over at a rest stop and decided to check social media. I hadn't bothered in a while, given how distant I'd become from my family. As I scrolled through Sarah's profile, my heart stopped. There, in vibrant color, were photos of my sister in a white gown, beaming next to a man I recognized as the one Jake had seen at the house. The caption read, "Just married. Thanks Mom and Dad for the amazing wedding and dream honeymoon." The pieces suddenly fell into place with sickening clarity. The money, the rushed need for cash, the evasive answers about the operation. It had all been a lie. My vision blurred as the reality of the situation hit me. Without thinking, I flung open the car door and stumbled out, gasping for air. The cool breeze did little to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. Betrayal, anger, hurt, they all swirled together as I leaned against my car, trying to steady myself. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother's number. Each ring felt like an eternity until finally, she answered. "Camilla? Is everything all right?" Her voice was casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Mom," I managed, my voice trembling. "I need you to be honest with me. What happened to the money we sent for your operation?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. "Camilla, you have to understand. There was no operation. We gave the money to Sarah for her wedding." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. "How could you?" I whispered. "Your sister finally met a good man," my mother explained, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "We couldn't leave her without a proper wedding gift. This was her chance at happiness." Tears streamed down my face as I spoke. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked for that money? How many nights I stayed up, how many weekends I gave up? Jake and I were saving that for our own wedding." There was a moment of silence before my mother responded, her voice cold and indifferent. "You're smart, Camilla. You can always earn more." Her callous response sparked a fire of anger within me. "I want the money back," I demanded. "All of it, now." To my shock, my mother laughed. It was a harsh, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Camilla," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You can't prove you gave us any money." "What?" I gasped. "Jake brought it to you. He gave it to Sarah." "Did he now?" My mother's voice was sickeningly sweet. "That's not how I remember it. If you try to take this to court, I'll tell them your boyfriend is a fraud. That he took the money for himself and never gave us a cent." I felt like I was going to be sick. You wouldn't." "Try me," she challenged. "It's your word against ours, dear. And let's face it, who would believe the daughter who's barely spoken to her family in years over her poor, struggling sister and her devoted parents?" Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my mother's words echoing in my ears. The depth of their betrayal was staggering. Not only had they lied to me, stolen from me, but now they were threatening to paint Jake as a criminal if I tried to get the money back. I slumped against my car, my legs no longer able to support me. How had it come to this? My own family, the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally, had manipulated and betrayed me in the worst possible way. I stumbled through our apartment door, emotionally drained and still reeling from the conversation with my mother. Jake was there in an instant, concern etched across his face. "Camilla, what happened?" he asked, guiding me to the couch. Through tears, I recounted everything, the wedding photos, the phone call, my mother's cruel words and threats. Jake listened intently, his arms around me, providing silent support. When I finished, Jake took a deep breath. "I had a feeling something wasn't right about that whole situation," he said softly. "That's why I took some precautions." Jake stood up and retrieved his laptop. "I bought a hidden camera before I went to your parents' house," he explained. "I had a hunch we might need proof of what happened." My eyes widened as Jake pulled up a video file. There on the screen was Jake, handing over the cash to Sarah. Clear as day, we could hear Sarah counting the money and stating it was for our mother's operation. "Jake," I whispered, "you're brilliant." He squeezed my hand. "With this, we can prove what really happened. Your mother can't deny it or threaten to accuse me of fraud." The next day, we met with a lawyer. After reviewing our evidence, she was confident we had a strong case. "It won't be a quick process," she warned us. "These things take time. But with this video, I believe we'll win." As we left the lawyer's office, Jake turned to me. "You know, we don't have to put our lives on hold while this plays out," he said. "Why don't we get married now?" I looked at him, surprised. "But what about the big wedding we were planning?" Jake shook his head. "That doesn't matter. What matters is us, starting our life together. We don't need a lavish party for that." Over the next few weeks, we planned a small, intimate ceremony. It wasn't the grand affair we'd originally envisioned, but as I stood there, exchanging vows with Jake surrounded by our closest friends, I realized this was perfect. There was a noticeable absence, my family. I hadn't called them, hadn't told them about the wedding. As much as it hurt, I knew it was for the best. As Jake and I shared our first dance as a married couple, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Yes, there was still a legal battle ahead, and the pain of my family's betrayal was still fresh. But here, in this moment, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported me, I felt hope for the future. Months passed, and our lawsuit against my mother finally went to court. As we presented our evidence, including Jake's video recording, I could see the shock and disbelief on the judge's face. My mother's attempts to paint us as liars crumbled in the face of irrefutable proof. The day the verdict was announced, my phone rang. It was my mother. "How dare you," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You ungrateful child." I remained silent as she ranted, listing off every perceived sacrifice they'd made for me growing up. Her words, once capable of cutting me to the core, now felt hollow. "I hope you're happy," she spat. "As of this moment, you are no longer my daughter. You're dead to me." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling a mix of pain and, surprisingly, relief. The court ordered my mother to repay the $22,000. I later learned she had to take out a loan to cover it. Life moved on. Jake and I focused on our careers and our life together, leaving the drama of my family behind. But news still trickled in through mutual acquaintances. Sarah's marriage, it seemed, was far from the fairy tale she'd envisioned. She and her husband stayed with our parents, turning the house into a constant party zone. Neighbors complained about the noise and drunken behavior. It all came to a head when Sarah's husband, in a drunken rage, tried to kick my parents out of their own home. The police were called, and the ugly truth of their situation was laid bare for all to see. The final straw came when Sarah lost custody of her daughter due to her negligent behavior. My parents, finally seeing the destruction Sarah had wrought, kicked her and her husband out. They took in their granddaughter, determined to give her the stable home Sarah couldn't provide. Just when I thought that chapter of my life was closed for good, my phone rang with a familiar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Camilla?" My mother's voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. "I miss you." I said nothing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. "We need your help," she continued. "With raising your niece. It's hard, and we're not as young as we used to be." As she spoke, a sense of déjà vu washed over me. History was indeed repeating itself. Where once they'd favored Sarah over me, now they were trying to rope me into caring for her child. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm. "I can't help you." "But she's your niece," my mother protested. "Don't you care about family?" I took a deep breath. "My niece is innocent in all this, and I hope she has a good life. But you haven't changed. You're still trying to use me to fix your mistakes." "I won't do it. Don't call me again." I hung up and immediately blocked her number, along with those of my father and Sarah. As I set the phone down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Jake found me on the balcony later that evening, staring out at the city lights. "Everything okay?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me. I leaned back into his embrace. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "I think it finally is." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the world go by. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain, the betrayals, the hard lessons learned. But I also thought about the strength I'd found, the love I'd built with Jake, and the life we were creating together.